Welcome to Glory to Rome. Today we follow the brutal path of a Roman gladiator, captured, trained, and thrown into blood sport. At the end, you'll learn what really decided their fate, and it wasn't their sword. Before the roar of the crowd, before the clash of steel, there was silence. And in that silence, a man was taken, not for glory, but for Rome. In the shadow of the Colosseum, thousands would live and die. But their stories didn't start beneath the arena. They started in chains. Conquest wasn't just about land, it was about people. When Rome expanded into Gaul, Hispania, Thrace, Britannia, it brought back slaves, warriors, and survivors. Many of these men were never criminals. They were soldiers, chiefs, fathers, and yet, in the eyes of Rome, they were spoils, property, captured in war, stripped of their weapons, marched hundreds of miles. They arrived in Rome not as men, but as merchandise. Those who resisted Rome's rule often met a choice: execution or the arena. Others, those with shattered pride or empty bellies, volunteered to become gladiators. They signed away their freedom for a chance at food, coin, and glory. But the cost was everything. Gladiators weren't just fighters, they were investments. The Roman elite made fortunes, buying, training, and renting out skilled fighters to games across the empire. Gladiator schools, called Ludi, were often state-sponsored. The most famous, Ludus Magnus, sat just meters from the Colosseum. Underground tunnels connected them directly. Each fighter was listed in ledgers, like livestock, their weight, strength, scars, their win-loss record. Some were trained for show, others for slaughter. And when a fighter fell, the owner lost their investment. Some Lannister would even pay doctors to keep their best men alive, stitched, braced, and sent back into the sand. New recruits arrived like cattle, shackled, exhausted, silent. The first thing they lost was privacy, stripped bare, scrubbed in cold water, inspected under torchlight, teeth, eyes, skin, strength. They were categorized like tools or animals. The next was pain, branded, marked with the sigil of the Ludus. The iron hissed as it touched flesh. Their first lesson: they didn't belong to themselves anymore. Every Ludus was different, but most followed the same rules. No weapons outside of training, no escape, no disobedience. Punishment was swift and public. Their names were erased, replaced by titles: the Thracian, Crixus, the Numidian Ghost. Some names were meant to intimidate, others to mock, but all of them stripped the fighter of their past. For many, it was the worst wound of all, worse than whips, worse than steel. They would whisper their real names to each other in the dark, clinging to the memory of who they were, before Rome turned them into monsters. Some gladiators never made it to the arena. They died in training or were killed for defiance. But for those who survived, the real horror still awaited. They could hear it, distant at first, the drums, the horns, the roar of 50,000 voices, calling not for heroes, but for blood. The gates of the Colosseum would open, and what lay beyond was death or glory. There was no third option. They had been captured, branded, stripped of identity. But the real transformation didn't happen in chains. It happened inside the Ludus, where discipline was forged in sweat, sand, and screams. The day began before sunrise. A trumpet's blare split the air, and the men rose, not with ceremony but instinct. No words, no hesitation. Delay meant punishment. Gladiators trained every single day, often for hours in the heat. No armor, no water, no mercy. They ran laps around the yard with weights tied to their arms and ankles. They practiced footwork in sand that was purposely raked uneven, forcing balance and precision. They fought with wooden swords, twice as heavy as real ones, to strengthen every strike. The goal wasn't just strength, it was endurance. The lanista didn't care if you were strong. He cared if you could keep fighting after your muscles failed. A single mistake in training could mean a shattered nose, a missed block, a broken rib. No one stopped the fight unless someone dropped unconscious. Or worse, pain was only part of the process. Control was the real weapon. Gladiators were constantly watched, not just by guards, but by spies within their own ranks. Men were rewarded for reporting rebellion. Others were punished simply to send a message. Food was rationed based on behavior. Fights staged between men who had quarreled. Friendships were discouraged. Every part of the Ludus was designed to break the mind before building the killer. Sleep came in dark, iron-bar dormitories, 20 men to a room, always within reach of guards. At night, some cried, some prayed, but most simply stared at the ceiling, waiting for the trumpet to scream again. Still, not every bond could be broken. In the silence between drills, men shared stories of lost families, of battles fought before capture, of names they once had. They passed knowledge, how to fake fatigue to rest, where to strike without killing, how to win without dying. In time, friendships formed, but so did rivalries, deadly ones. Rankings within the Ludus mattered. Those who performed well earned better food, lighter duties, access to real weapons. But that also made them targets. A rival could injure you during sparring, undercut your footing, report lies to the lanista. Trust was a risk, but isolation could break you faster. After weeks or months of training, a gladiator would receive his first fight order. His name was announced, his opponent revealed, and the countdown began. He was issued real armor now, but not always complete. Some fought with no helmets, others with mismatched gear. It wasn't about fairness, it was about spectacle. Trainers would walk him through the arena layout, where the sun would hit, where to fall if wounded, how to kill quickly if the crowd got bored. In the days before the fight, he would spar harder than ever. Not to get stronger, but to stay alive. Many vomited from fear, others begged to be replaced. Few slept at all. One wrong move, one flash of hesitation, and you didn't just die, you died badly. The morning of a match was quiet, too quiet. Some paced, others prayed. A few carved messages into the wooden walls of their cells, just in case. There was no grand pep talk, no morale speech, just a guard and a gate. Fighters were led to a staging tunnel beneath the Colosseum. The noise of the crowd throbbed like a storm overhead. Dust fell from the ceiling with every cheer. Before entering the arena, the lanista would say just 4 words: kill or be killed. And then the gate would rise, and the man who'd once been a farmer, a thief, a son, would walk into the sun as a gladiator. The sand was real. The blood was real. But the cheers, those were for the illusion. The Colosseum was not a battlefield. It was theater, a stage where men lived and died for applause. And when the gate rose, no one cared where you came from, only how well you killed. It was called the Flavian Amphitheater. But to the people, it was the Colosseum. 50,000 Romans packed into its seats. Nobles in white togas, drunken workers, vendors screaming for wine and figs. It wasn't just a place, it was a machine, built for death, polished with spectacle. Beneath the arena floor were cages, tunnels, holding pens for animals and men. Elevators lifted fighters into sunlight as horns echoed above, from darkness to center stage, in seconds. And every eye was on you. The sand felt hot, even through sandals. You could feel the heat rising into your bones. The sun burned your shoulders, your helmet pressed tight against your brow. You could hear your own breath, louder than the crowd. Across the arena, another man stood, just like you, trying not to shake. Sometimes he was your equal, sometimes a monster, a Retiarius with a net and trident, a Mumio with a curved blade, a man who wanted to live just as badly as you. There were no warm-ups, no countdown, just a signal from a man in the Emperor's box. And then you fought. The fights weren't always to the death, but they could be. Some matches were pure showmanship, sparks flying from shields, clashing metal, choreographed to entertain. Others, raw, ugly, fights where swords slipped, men screamed, and limbs hit sand. The crowd didn't want mercy. They wanted a story. They wanted to see fear turn to fury, skill turn to survival. And when one fighter fell, the Emperor could give the signal, a raised thumb or a turned one. But that decision wasn't just politics, it was performance. The crowd could beg for mercy or roar for blood, and the Emperor played to them. Winning a fight didn't make you a hero, it made you available for the next. Some gladiators survived dozens of matches, some even became stars, their faces painted on walls, names sung by poets. But they were still property, still caged at night, still one bad match away from being forgotten. The lucky ones were granted the Rudis, a wooden sword symbolizing freedom. But it was rare. More often, freedom came through years of killing or through political favor. And even free men could be called back to fight, as crowd pleasers, as legends, reborn. Glory was a trap, and survival only temporary. The Colosseum floor was raked clean after every match, the blood absorbed, the bodies removed, but the echoes never left. Gladiators died alone, unburied, tossed into pits beneath the city, marked only by rumors and ash. Some were remembered. Champions like Spiculus, who fought over 50 times. Others were forgotten before their blood dried. But every man who stepped into the arena knew one thing. If the fight didn't kill you, the memory would. Surviving the arena wasn't the end. For some, it was just the beginning. Because in Rome, if you fought well enough, if you died slow enough, you could become something more. A symbol, a celebrity, a god of the sand. But for every name that echoed in the streets, there were 100 who vanished. Some men didn't just survive. They thrived. They earned nicknames. The Butcher of Thrace, the Red Wolf, the Last Gaul. Women whispered about them. Children copied their moves with sticks. Merchants sold clay figurines in their likeness. Rome's crowds had favorites, just like modern sports, and gladiators became stars on borrowed time. One man, Flamma, fought over 30 times. He was offered freedom 4 times. He refused them all. Why? Because out there, in the streets, he was a nobody. In the arena, he was a god. Victory came with rewards, gold, fine wine, the favor of nobles, even the emperor himself. Some gladiators were invited to feasts. They were dressed in robes, fed grapes and roasted lamb, just to be gawked at like trophies. Others were given homes, slaves, even Roman wives. But none of it was real, because the next morning, you still woke up in a cell, Your sword was still chained to the wall, and your life still belonged to the Lanista. The more famous you became, the more dangerous the games became. You were matched against killers, veterans, animals, multiple opponents at once, just for show. Because crowds demanded escalation. They wanted more blood, more drama, more spectacle. And if you hesitated, if you looked tired, they'd turn on you. The same people who once cheered your name would now call for your death. Fame wasn't freedom. It was a spotlight on a stage made of bones. There was one way out. The rudies, a wooden sword, a gift from a sponsor or the emperor, symbolizing your release. It meant you had served long enough, killed enough, suffered enough. It meant you were free, but most never earned it. And those who did, many didn't take it, because freedom meant obscurity. It meant no more cheers, no more gifts, no more purpose. After years of blood and discipline, some couldn't go back to the silence. They chose the arena, again and again, until it finally took them. For every gladiator who lived like a king, hundreds died as slaves. No burial, no name on a stone, no song sung for their courage. They bled into the sand and were swept away like dust. Rome didn't care. The crowd moved on. The next match, the next name, the next show. But in the tunnels below the Colosseum, their spirits lingered. And when new recruits arrived, they could feel it. Not fear, not glory, but silence. The silence of men who gave everything and were remembered by no one. They are gone now, the swords, the cheers, the sand. The gates are closed, the crowd is silent. But the stories remain. The legacy of the gladiator is not carved into statues, but into the blood-soaked memory of Rome. And what they left behind still echoes in the bones of the empire. Much of what we know about gladiators is a lie. Hollywood made them heroes, masters of destiny, men who chose the fight, but the truth is darker. Most were slaves, most were desperate, most died young. They were not warriors of glory. They were instruments of control, tools of fear and entertainment in a city drunk on power. And yet, even now, we remember them, not because they won, but because they endured. Across the ruins of Rome, buried beneath marketplaces, apartment blocks, and broken temples, lie the graves of gladiators, unmarked, uncelebrated, pits of shattered bones, skulls split by blades, spines crushed under hammers. Archaeologists have uncovered mass graves, some showing signs of medical care, others signs of execution. These weren't noble burials, they were disposal sites. But even in death, the body told the truth. Fractures healed and rebroken, teeth knocked out, scars layered over scars, a history not written in scrolls, but in bones. And yet, the gladiator is everywhere, etched into mosaics, painted on villa walls, immortalized in marble, not as victims, not as slaves, but as icons. Their battles were used to teach Roman children courage. Their images decorated amphitheaters across the empire. They became symbols of strength, endurance, masculinity. The irony? Rome honored the image, but forgot the man. The Colosseum didn't just feed the people, it shaped them. It taught them who had power and who didn't. It reminded the mob that their hunger was satisfied by suffering, that loyalty to the emperor meant access to spectacle. It wasn't just blood sport, it was politics. The arena kept the streets quiet by keeping the crowds entertained. And the gladiators, they were the currency, the offering, the illusion of strength, paid for with real pain. Today, the Colosseum still stands, cracked, crumbled, but still watching. Millions walk its halls, take selfies on its stones, buy replica swords from gift shops, but beneath that spectacle lies a silence. And if you listen long enough, you might still hear it. The clash of iron, the gasp of a final breath, the distant echo of a name no one remembers. We remember gladiators not because they were free, but because they weren't, because they fought, even when the world gave them nothing, because they turned pain into purpose and death into myth. Their stories didn't start beneath the arena, but that's where they ended. And Rome, it never looked back. Their names may be lost, their bones buried deep beneath the empire, but their legacy still speaks. This was the story of men who were broken, then forged into legend, of blood spilled and glory earned, not in life, but in memory. If you felt the weight of their story, if you want more journeys into the heart of ancient war, power and sacrifice, subscribe and join us, because their story is just the beginning. This is more than history. This is legacy. This is glory to Rome.